You know, for a lot of our viewers, you are the face of the stress, the disruption that they're going to face next week, whether that is children trying to go to exams, whether it's adults trying to get to work or hospital appointments, whether it's people, hundreds of thousands of people trying to go to Glastonbury. What would you say to them?
Well, we don't want to be the cause of the disruption in people's lives. We want a settlement to this dispute, but we're facing a crisis for our members. We're faced with thousands of job cuts, despite what Grant Shapps says. There's been no guarantee that these redundancies won't be compulsory. We've seen 4,000 or 5,000 jobs already go from the railway. They've told our maintenance staff on Network Rail that their 3,000 jobs will go. They're going to cut back on the safety regime. They've told us that every single booking office in Britain will close. They've told us that they're going to extend the working week from 35 hours to 40 or possibly 44. And for new entrants, that will mean lower wages. So they're actually proposing pay cuts, not a pay rise, and an increase in working time on the railway. And if that's the way the rest of society is going to go, that you have to work more hours for less money, we've got a real crisis in this country, because it means they're trying to restore profit in a way that makes workers pay for that through their pay bills and through their wage slips and through the amount of time they're going to spend in the workplace.
At the same time, though, a lot of people work more than 35 hours a week, and a lot of people are going to be facing, in fact, most of it, a real terms pay cut because of inflation. Are you not asking for special treatment here?
No, we're not asking for special treatment. We've had pay cuts. Most of our members have not had a pay rise for 2 to 3 years. I'm talking about actual pay cuts, the reduction of salaries, as well as the losses against the rate of inflation, which has been said is 11% at the moment. So it's not just losing out against the cost of living. They're actually proposing to cut pay on the railway going forward. That was a proposal put to us by the train operating companies on Thursday. And since that time, they've not invited us to any meetings whatsoever.
Just to be clear on this, because the reports that I've read are saying that the train operating companies are offering around 2.5% pay rise.
They've made no offer.
And you are gunning for 11% pay rise. Is that true?
Neither of those things are true.
OK, so what is true?
The train operating companies have made no offer at all during these talks. There are two strands of talks. Network Rail have got a strand, which is about half the people, and the train operators. The train operators adjourned the meeting on Thursday. They've not invited us to any talks whatsoever, and they've made no offer on pay.
And
what they've told us is what they plan to do.
And what are you looking for on pay?
We're looking for a pay rise that reflects the cost of living.
So what does that mean?
Well, at the time...
Let's be really clear.
Yeah,
what are you asking for?
At the time of the Network Rail pay deal that should have been done in December, it was 7.1%, the retail price index. Let's not forget that those members didn't get a pay rise last year either.
So is that what you're looking for?
Well, that's what the cost of living would have been at the time these deals should have been struck. So we're going to negotiate to see if we can get a deal that reflects that cost of living. There are a number of ways which you can put value into a package. It's not all about straightforward pay. So we'll talk to them constructively, but they're making offers that are nowhere near that. And for half the people in the dispute, there's no offer at all. And for many of them, it's the third year where there's no offer and no proposal.
Now, Grant Shapps makes a point about the amount of taxpayers' money that is going into the railways currently, right? And, of course, we know through COVID that the taxpayers have to bankroll the railways and also less people going into the office. And so around 75%, I think, is the sort of capacity on the railways. He says, the government has spent £16 billion on railways since the start of the pandemic, £600 per household. Are you not effectively asking taxpayers to bankroll salaries?
No, we're not. That 16 billion was at the peak of COVID, when there were only 3 or 4% of people travelling on the railway. Our members worked through that, and the government insisted that the railways be kept open. We worked with them on that, and that was the last time I met Grant Shapps to talk about working practices and the way that we could keep the railway open. So when they say we didn't get furlough, the reason we didn't get furloughed is we kept working every day, every shift, 7 days a week.
I think the point he's making is that actually we're talking about taxpayers.
I'll come to that. So at that time there was a subsidy, but let's not forget, during that period, these train operating companies and the rolling stock leasing companies and the subcontractors made £500 million of profit in the worst year for rail revenue. So what Grant Shapps is actually doing is subsidising private sector profit, dividends and shares. Two of the companies that I'm dealing with in this dispute, First Group and Go Ahead, are subject to takeover bids of billions of pounds. They're really attractive to private sector investors, and they want to take them over because they know that there's going to be profit even while the railway is subsidised. It's not actually true that they're being subsidised to that level. Before COVID, they were subsidised by 6.4 billion. And then in the COVID period, they had to add to that to keep it open because there was no revenue. And what these train operating companies said was, if you don't give us money through the emergency measures, we're going to give you the keys back so that the state can run the railway. And that would have been a more efficient way to run it, actually, because that would have saved £500 million of profit that's going out to these companies. So you can't have it both ways. He's claiming that workers are subsidised while he's subsidising dividends and shares.
Do you ever worry, with the big strikes happening, that there's a risk that you're overplaying your hand? Grant Shapps has said, and he said the programme earlier, that workers shouldn't risk striking themselves out of a job. We know that the government is looking at changing some of the legislation around strikes so that, you know, it's easier for workers to come in to cover striking workers, also potentially increasing the damages that companies can get back from unions for illegal strikes. Do you worry?
Well, we don't take part in illegal strikes. This is a lawful ballot conducted under this Tory government's anti-union legislation.
But do you think that you might be overplaying your hand and that you're basically going to battle with the government and there will be a backlash to it?
Well, if we don't play our hand, thousands of my members will lose their jobs. Railway services will be cut back. The safety regime that has been in place for a good deal of time will be cut back. 50% of the maintenance on the railway infrastructure is scheduled to be cut so that it can cut 3,000 of our members' jobs. So we have to fight this because we haven't had any pay rises. We're faced with thousands of job cuts and they want to rip up our terms and conditions in a form of fire and rehire that's internal to the railway. It's just as ruthless as P&O, really, but they haven't got agency workers to come in. So they're saying to our people, you will have to entirely change the way you work. And if you're a new entrant, you'll have to work longer and for less money. And what they've also thrown on the table this week in both London Underground and the Railway Pension Scheme is that the pensions of our members are going to be decimated. They're going to make us poorer not only while we're at work, but poorer in retirement. And that's an agenda that the government has got because they want to subsidise the private sector in this country, as they are doing in the health service, which is being consumed by the private sector, as they've done in the education service, which is being consumed by the private sector, all of which are farming subsidy direct into their dividends and shareholdings.
Well, it's pretty clear that you're not going to back away from strike action sitting here. That is more than clear. I just want to throw
we're available to negotiate, Sophie. This nonsense that we didn't attend negotiations yesterday, which Grant Shapps has just said on your programme, is an entire fabrication. We left Network Rail on Friday night at around 7:30, and they said to us, we are prepared to meet you on Sunday. They never mentioned any negotiations on Saturday because they were going to speak to the Department for Transport about what they might be able to discuss with us.
So he's lying?
So he's making it up.
He's lying?
Well, he's making it up. What he's saying is untrue. We didn't attend a rally instead of negotiations. There were no negotiations scheduled, and the train operating companies have not spoken to me or any of my officials since Thursday at lunchtime.
Throwing forward, could we see more strikes over the summer? And what kind of consequences could they have? Grant Shapps is saying that, look, Fright will still be running. We're not in a situation where, you know, the lights could go out. Is he right?
Well, I don't want the lights to go out. Nobody from my side of the situation has said the lights will go out. We know they will run a train service using replacement labour, many of whom are unqualified to do the work and have had very short 2 or 3 hour training programmes to do safety critical work.
Multiple strikes throughout the rest of the year.
If there's not a settlement, we will continue our campaign. I know that the ASLEF, another union, is balloting their members and their returns on July the 11th. The TSSA, which is largely a management union in the railway, is also balloting their members in Network Rail and in many of the train operating companies. It's likely that Unite, that has some engineering members in the railway, will also ballot. But I think there are going to be many unions balloting across the country because people can't take it anymore. We've got people who are doing full-time jobs who are having to take state benefits and use food banks. That is a national disgrace. And Grant Shapps is fairly blasé about that. He's claiming that everybody on the railway is overpaid and sitting around doing nothing. Our members, the median wage in this dispute is £31,000. Many of the people on strike next week are earning as low as £18,000, and typically many of them are earning in the mid-20s. For full-time jobs working shifts around the clock.
You think this is a class struggle, class war?
Well, there's a class aspect to everything in the economy. There are lower paid people and there are wealthy people in this society. And what's wrong in this society is that there is an imbalance between the people that do the work to keep this country going, who create the wealth of our civilisation and don't get a fair share of that wealth because it's going to people who are vastly wealthy.
Where do you think Labour are currently on this class struggle?
I don't know where Labour are. If somebody could tell me where Labour are, I'd be very happy to hear it. I think they're triangulating between what they think is public opinion in the likes of the Daily Mail and the commentariat in this country. But what they've got to do, and what I want them to do, and I want Keir Starmer to be successful, and I want him to be our next Prime Minister, is get back in contact with working people. Working people are suffering. There's really poor employment practice in this country. Many people are in vulnerable jobs with low pay. And he's got to come up with a programme that identifies himself and the Labour Party's policies directly with those working people so that they can get behind him and the trade union movement can get fully behind him.
I mean, Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, reportedly apologised in Shadow Cabinet for saying that if he was an RMT member, he would be voting for strike action.
Well, if anyone was an RMT member, they'd be voting for strike action. You look at the ballot. We had 89% of our members in favour.
But do you think that Labour should be more comfortable about saying that publicly, if that's what they think?
Labour should be comfortable with backing working-class people who are struggling. And one of the ways that they can redress the imbalance is through industrial action, where negotiations fail. What else are we to do? Are we to plead? Are we to beg? We want to bargain for our futures. We want to negotiate. And if we're not bargaining, you have to beg. And I don't want any working-class people in this country to have to beg the employers for a decent living. And Keir Starmer shouldn't want that either. So if we don't have industrial action and we don't have that attempt to rebalance society, what is it we do? Do we just accept mass redundancies and our people getting poorer year by year, which is the situation since Cameron Osborne got elected? Public sector workers have been robbed of wages, whether they're in the military, the police force, the health service, the care service, education. All of those people are getting poorer every year, and it's this government that's responsible for it. And if Keir Starmer can't find the imagination to find which side of the equation he needs to be on, he needs to think about where the Labour Party's going. And I hope he can succeed in that.
You say that you would like him to be the next Prime Minister. Do you think he's on track to be the next Prime Minister?
Well, I hope so. I want a Labour government. I want a Labour government that can deliver a pro-working people agenda. And that means a lot of things. It means funding the public services properly, but it also means reconfiguring our cities and our towns so that our people can get decent council housing. It means we have a good transport system, it means we have a good environment, and the railways are a key part of that. But in many of our towns and villages and cities, people are cut off by high transport fares, by high service costs for everything that they do. Now, he's got to find a way of creating policies that address that situation. And I hope he can succeed. Well, he hasn't produced policies. They're in that position where they're in purdah, as they call it, on policy. But I think he's got to come out with some policies that show he's on the side of working people.